This is part 2 of our dividing decimals. So if you remember our last video, we worked on a whole number as our divisor with a decimal as our dividend, and the reverse with a decimal as our divisor and a whole number as our dividend. Today we're going to work on two things. We're going to work on if we have a decimal as our divisor and our dividend, and what we do about that. And then we'll see our other one that we'll work on in a moment. So our first problem, we're going to focus on this. I have 1 and 2600ths divided by 3/10. Well, if you remember from our lesson from before, what we do is we take that decimal and we move it to the right. So if I have one movement, I'm going to do the same thing to my decimal on the inside. Let's look at this problem. I have 3 and 2600ths as my divisor. And on the inside I have 1204 and 2700ths as my decimal. And I go 1, 2. So I'm going to do the same thing over here, 1, 2. And then this problem would be a very large problem, 120,427 divided by 326. It's going to be the same thing if I have this kind of problem as well. If I have one that looks like this, 1 and 3700ths as my divisor, and 12 and 8/10. What I do, remember, is I go 1, 2. However many times I move that decimal in my divisor, I'm going to do the same thing to my dividend. 1. Remember, when I run out of spots, I can always add zeros after that decimal. 2. So I've moved it 2 spots for my divisor. Whatever I do to the left, I have to do to the right. So I have to move it 1, 2 spots. So this problem would become 1,280 divided by 137. So now that we have that concept, let's go back to our original problem, or not original, a different problem. I have 1 and 2/10 as my divisor, and I'm going to divide by 4.8, or 4 and 8/10. I have to move it 1 spot. I move it 1 spot. So I'm going to rewrite my problem for myself. And here, how many times does 12 go into 48? I know it goes in 4, and I'm going to use my does McDonald's serve burgers to remind me. I multiply next. 12 times 4, that's 48. Then I subtract. I get 0. There's nothing to bring down, so my problem is done. My answer is 4. So that was a very simple problem. What if we have a more complicated problem like this? Let's do 0.8 or 8/10 as our divisor, and let's do 12 as my dividend. Actually, let's do 12 and 4/10. So what do? Well, I have a decimal as my divisor, so I need to get rid of it. I only move it 1 spot. So I do the same thing to the right. Whatever I do to the left, I have to do to the right. So now I have 124 divided by 8. I'm going to use that same acronym. Does McDonald's serve burgers? 8 goes into 12 1 time. My divide, multiply. 8 times 1 is 8. Subtract, I get 4. Bring down. And I repeat. So divide. How many times does 8 go into 4? It goes in 5 times. 5 times 8, that is 40. Subtract. And now I'm done. If you remember from before, since I have nothing to bring down, I could change it to a fraction. And it would be 4/8, which would simplify as 1/2. But since I'm working with decimals, I want to keep it as decimals. So if you remember from our previous lessons, Whenever I run out of numbers or I need to add zeros, I can, as long as I add that decimal. So when I come to the end of a problem and there's still items to bring down, I add a decimal, and remember I can add a 0 behind it to keep bringing down. Now I can bring down 8 goes into 40 5 times. 5 times 8, that is 40. Subtract 0, there's nothing to bring down. Is my answer 155? Well, it's not, because remember I have this decimal, and when I divide it, I always bring that decimal straight up. Now my answer is complete. 0.8 as my divisor, 8/10. When I have 12 and 4/10 as my dividend, my answer is 15 and 5/10, or 15 and a half. Let's look at a different problem though, because this one ended really nicely. I didn't have to bring very much down. So this is going to be our last item, our last understanding for division of decimals. What if I have this number? I'm going to have 2 and 3/10 divided by 0.03, or 3/100. Well, I'm going to start the same way as before. 1, 2, I have to move that decimal spot. So that becomes a 3 now. And whatever I do to the left, I have to do to the right. So it goes 1. Now I have to add a 0. 2. So my new number is 230. Well, what do I do next? Well, I'm going to use my same steps as before. Does McDonald's serve burgers? 3 goes into 23. That is 7 times. Now I multiply. 7 times 3 is 21. Subtract. Bring down. 3 goes into 20 6 times. 6 times 3 is 18. Subtract. Okay, this is where I was before. So remember, when I need more numbers to bring down, because I'm working with decimals, I just add that decimal point and I add 0. So now I can bring down. I'm going to add that decimal, because remember, I'm going to bring it straight up when I'm dividing. How many times does 3 go into 26? Going to repeat. 3 times 6 is 18. Subtract. I need another number to bring down, so I can add a 0, because remember, adding a 0 at the end does not change its value. And I'm going to repeat. How many times does 20 go, or 3 go into 20? That is 6. 18. Do you notice something yet? I'm always going to get a 2, and I'll always bring down 0. So I'm going to see this pattern over and over and over again. You see 20 minus 8, then 20 minus 18, 20 minus 18. It's going to be 20 minus 18 again. This pattern will go on forever. So when I do that, I can put a bar above the number or numbers that repeats. And this bar lets me know that the number goes on forever and ever and ever. So let's look at it like this. My answer is 76.6 with a bar over. And remember, what this bar means is this number repeats forever. So that means this number is the same as 76.666666666. But since we don't want to write it forever, we just abbreviate with this bar. So my final answer would be 76.6 with that bar across.